Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, June the 11th, 2025, and today I've got a nice little treat for you. I said last week that I wanted to start incorporating more interviews, and I think Wednesdays make sense for such things. Anyway, I had the absolute privilege of catching up with Betsy Lamb, part of Cornell University's Integrated Pest Management Program, who offered us a ton of insight, not just on how aphids work and what they do to plants, but what we as growers can do to manage them. So let's do it. All right, Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I think might be the first podcast that I've ever done, so this is kind of exciting.
Well, that's very exciting. I'm very excited to have you. We have a big topic today. So maybe, though, let's just start with you giving us a little bit of your background, like where you are, what you do professionally, those sorts of things.
So I'm based in Ithaca, New York. I work for Cornell's Integrated Pest Management Program, which is a statewide program that covers all the crops and all the pests and even community things. My area is ornamentals. So I probably will also be talking about vegetable crops and fruit crops today. But with ornamentals, I get to look at everything in greenhouses, which is nice. And so we have lots of issues with aphids in greenhouses, so that's always part of the conversation. But mostly I work with greenhouse growers of floriculture crops. I work with cut flower growers outside and in greenhouses. I work with Christmas tree growers and then nursery growers.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of the stuff that we definitely want to cover. And especially with greenhouses. I mean, that is an issue, a big one with us for growers, because today's topic is going to be centered on aphids. Maybe start by describing a little bit about the aphid life cycles. We can get into some of the management stuff in the second segment, but I always think about pests and how important it is to kind of understand how they function in order to treat them. So yeah, maybe start there.
Yep. So I will also just throw in a little bit for identification, because that's all, I'm going to talk about that later when we start talking about management. But one of the ways you can tell that you've actually got an aphid, because they're different shapes, they can be different colors. They have what are called cornicles. They're like two little tailpipes that stick out the back end of both the larva, both the nymph stage and the adult. So that helps you know that you've got an aphid. And even in terms of life cycles, there are lots of kinds of aphids, and they affect a lot of different crops. And they even have a variety of different kinds of life cycles. So all aphids that I know of have lots of generations per year. That makes them more difficult to control, because if it was just one, you could get in there, get them, and then you're done. But in this case, they just keep producing them more of themselves. And also, one of the entomologists here always likes to say, just to, scare the growers, that aphids are born pregnant. They are. You can see the eye spots of the next generation, and actually within that next generation, the third generation is in there already. So that one of the things that tells you is that you can go from one aphid to a lot of aphids really, really quickly if you have the right environment. So let's talk about life cycles. There are some that just have a single host, so they'll just stay on the same host. They may have multiple species that they affect, but they just stay on that plant, and they produce asexually most of the year. And then when it's going to get to a point where they need to overwinter or they need to survive whatever the conditions are, they'll form a sexual stage, they'll reproduce, they'll lay eggs, and it's usually the eggs that overwinter. There's some that actually have alternate hosts, so they'll in the summer they're on one host plant. They're, again, producing many generations. Then they form an alate stage, so a stage with wings, and they fly to another host. So it's often a woody host, and we've seen some of those recently outside where you'll have this big population of something you've never seen before. There's some that we're also trying to figure out what the alternate host is, because they have one, but we don't really know what it is. But that one, there's a sexual form on that alternate host, and they have eggs that overwinter on that host. And then when those eggs hatch out, they go back to the first host, the summer host. Now, in greenhouses, we kind of goof that up because we have conditions that they like all year round often. And so they may never form a sexual stage at all. They just keep reproducing asexually. So you just keep aphids produce aphids. They're all female. They're all producing more aphids. It's, as I said, easy to go from a couple to a lot really quickly. We do in some of our greenhouses. They close them down in the winter, and if there's no plant material, they will kill all the aphids. They don't seem to overwinter in greenhouses very often, but then they'll come back in easily the next spring. So we'll see them again, even though it's like, well, but there were no eggs. How can they be here? But they figure out a way to get there. Usually, we bring them in, or it's open enough that they fly in, or they come in on plant material.
I have a couple clarifying questions here because one, how many that they can have the third generation already ready is horrifying. But where they lay eggs where are they laying their eggs to overwinter? That's on plant material. That's on
plant material, I believe. As I say, I don't do much with eggs because I'm not looking at aphids outside. I certainly see them outside. But my understanding is, the eggs are on the plant material, and certainly on the ones that are on woody species. That would make sense because they're right there ready to hatch out. They have something to feed on when they hatch out, which not all insects seem to do this, but most of them lay their eggs somewhere where the next generation is likely to survive.
Right. Okay. So the overwintering factors, I thought the thing you mentioned about greenhouses, and maybe just you can elaborate on that a little bit, but like there's the greenhouses that you sort of shut down over the winter. That's where you see less aphid presence in the spring, but the greenhouses that you have,
I can't guarantee that, but it's true. If you've got a greenhouse that's got perfect conditions for aphids all year round, and you're not doing anything to reduce populations, they will just keep growing and growing and growing. And just to throw in another complexity, if you've got aphids that there's so many on a plant, and they don't move from plant to plant very fast because they have to walk. But if you've got a plant that's got so many aphids on it that they're starting to not have enough food source, they will form a flying population. The next generation will actually develop wings and fly off to another plant and start another population. So you can have alates or winged ones in a greenhouse, but that to me means you're not paying attention. You have not been scouting, you've not been looking for them, and when you found them, you haven't treated them successfully. Because you could have a lot of aphids on a plant before they all form a winged form.
Oh, they're really brilliant in their adaptations.
Most insects are, and that's why they're pests. If they were not good and smart at what they did, we'd have a couple.
Yeah, right. I do want to drill down just a little bit on one thing you said that I was kind of touching on there, that like if you keep kind of perfect growing conditions all winter, they're never going back into that asexual, like they're just asexually reproducing.
No, they're always asexual.
Sorry. Yeah, always asexually reproducing. So that's in the situation where it gets relatively cold, or that's kind of in like you keep a static temperature in that tunnel.
It doesn't have to be static. We'll talk about environment in a bit, but they can tolerate a range of temperatures. So as long as it's not so hot that they stop reproducing, or so hot they actually die, I suppose, or so cold that they stop reproducing, or so cold that it actually kills them, the rate of generation or the rate of increase of the population will slow down or speed up based on how ideal the conditions are. And we're just talking temperature. They also need water. They also need plant material to feed on. So if you had a greenhouse that was completely in perfect ideal conditions but had no green plant material in there, you wouldn't have aphids. There's nothing to eat. And like us, I mean, we don't go very many places where there's nothing to eat. We like to eat, so do they.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add one more thing that kind of relates to what you were talking about. So people will think, okay, great, we've got a greenhouse, we shut it down for the winter, we let it freeze, and that will get rid of all our pests. And in aphids, that's probably true for aphids. It's not true for everything, just to make that point. And so, I mean, aphids, as I say, if there's nothing there for them to eat, is it possible that they would form lay eggs in a greenhouse, winter greenhouse? We changed from full on temperature to nothing pretty quickly, so I've not seen it as a problem.
Okay. Yeah, good. All right, that's a great little baseline for what we're dealing with here. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss a little bit about the conditions that aphids like most. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate
up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Trax to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruits, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join the mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTIL for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. All right, so that was both terrifying and fascinating. I want to kind of steer this conversation a little bit more in the direction of the conditions under which they thrive. And that could be both environmental conditions, but also maybe conditions within the plant. So maybe just talk to that a little bit.
Okay. So again, we're talking about lots of different kinds of aphids. And if you're talking about outside and you see aphids, then somewhere during the year, there's an environment that they like. Because if you never had that environment, you wouldn't have aphids. So it may be that some you see earlier and some you see later. Some like it a little warmer, some like it a little cooler. But they have, like any organism, they have a range of ideal temperatures or other conditions. It's not that they die instantly when you go outside of that range, but the rate of population growth may slow or whatever. So, all organisms need, something to live on, water, nutrients, so something to eat, and something for protection. But greenhouses, and actually even outside, those conditions are often met. We always see aphids somewhere in the environment in a season. Some seasons have more, some seasons have less. That may be affected by how well the eggs survive, if there are eggs that are laid. So that's part of it. One of the things that's an interesting piece of environment and temperature when we're looking at biological control of aphids is that often the aphids will tolerate cooler temperatures than the biological controls will. So getting early season cool temperature biological control is difficult. And one of the places we see actually aphids being a problem is in overwintered perennials. So that in overwintered perennials where they put them in just under plastic and they allow them to freeze, or maybe not even freeze, but their aphids will often start up early there. And so by the time you've taken the plastic off to look at those plants, you've already got aphids, and the bios are not very happy. Another piece that goes along in terms of environment and also relates to control, because much of environment and control tied together. If you can adapt the environment so that it's not ideal, that helps you with management of a pest. The other one is that if you over-fertilize your plants with nitrogen, the aphids love it. For some reason, whether it's, and I can make up a plausible situation. So aphids are feeding in the phloem of the plant. So they're sucking in sap. The sap has a lot of sugars and not a lot of other things, and that's why aphids excrete honeydew, which is basically sugar water, because there's more sugars than they need. So they're basically getting rid of the extra sugar. So if you've got plant sap, if you've got plants that are higher in nitrogen, you've over-fertilized them, the assumption then is that there's more nitrogen in the sap. And so now you've got a very happy aphid that will now produce more progeny. So we've seen it, and lots of different people have studied that effect, and it works on other sucking insects as well, that if you actually over-fertilize, you will have worse aphid problems. So that's all kind of, yes, those things that fit in between environment and management.
Yeah, I'm curious, and maybe it's just a factor of the early spring biologicals not being there, naturally to be able to have the predation needed to keep the numbers down of aphids. But I guess my question is there a relationship between in the spring we have cool soils and warming temperatures, and that seems to be a time when we have, heavy aphid pressures. And then in the fall, when we have warmer soils but cold air temperatures, that also seems to be a time that we have heavy aphid pressure. But during the summer, it feels like that's when we don't have the biggest aphid pressure in generally speaking. I mean, obviously they're around. Can you speak a little bit to that? Is there like a connection there, or is that a relationship with the beneficials?
I can think of two things. Well, for one thing, when you're saying aphids, you may or may not be talking about the same type of aphids in all those situations. So it may be that there are aphids that like it cooler, so we tend to see them early in the spring and later in the fall, and they're just not, the temperatures are not such that there are really big populations in the summer. They're not dead, but they're not, you're not seeing the large numbers, because in any situation there can be quite a lot of aphids. We never see them because there's just not enough for us to really notice. But it could also be that, yes, you're right, that in any case with biological control, it takes a while for the biological control to build up because they feed on whatever the pest is, and then their population increases. So they're always slightly behind. But it could be that, yes, in the summer they've caught up. And so they've done, they've reduced the aphid populations down, so we're not seeing them. And as it gets a little cooler, now the bios are not as happy. And so now we start seeing a little bit more aphid pressure at the end. It's hard to say just across aphids across the board. I mean, if we were talking about a specific species, they've probably done the research to find out, okay, what is the range at which they're happiest. And then we see fewer when the whatever the condition is not perfect for them. But I think both those things probably go along. And then one of the things, too, is I wanted to put in some information on what kind of damage aphids cause, because they can be different. So again, I said they have sucking mouth parts. They feed in the vascular tissue. You can find them, different aphids you can find anywhere on the plant, including on the roots. And we don't often dig plants up to look at the roots, but root aphids we're finding are a big issue in Christmas trees. And even the fact that ants will move them around from tree to tree. So, that there are aphids everywhere, whether we really notice them or not. But what kind of damage they cause may depend on the type of aphid. So if we're looking at greenhouse, for example, green peach aphid is very, very common. You can have a lot of feeding before the plant actually shows symptoms. The biggest problem with green peach aphid is that if you're growing an ornamental, people see them and they don't want to see them. Or if you're growing a crop like lettuce, you will have aphids on the lettuce and people are not happy because you're feeding them the leaves. If it was a plant where you were feeding them the seeds and there are no aphids on the seeds, it wouldn't necessarily matter in terms of how many aphids you have. Again, if you have a huge population, they'll be reducing the amount of vascular liquid, the sap, to a point where you maybe don't have as good growth, but often you don't see much in the way of and a very obvious symptom. Some aphids do transmit plant viruses, so that's another problem. And some, again, in greenhouses, we have something called foxglove aphid. In foxglove aphid, you can often see the damage before you see the aphids. The aphids are tiny, they're there, but you get this curling of the leaves on the top of the plant. So you can kind of look down a row and be like, okay, that one's got them, and that one's got them, and that one's got them. And then when you go look, you will find the foxglove aphids there happily feeding away. So sometimes the damage is caused just by the part of the plant they're feeding on. So if they are taking sap out of the bud, you might get a reduction in growth of parts of the bud. And some of them have toxic saliva. So they inject, I just learned something new I didn't know about, that when they're putting their mouth parts into the plant, they kind of form a tube because they're not very big and plant tissues are kind of tough to help them get it in there. But so sometimes they also inject something else in there and it causes the plant to react. So in things, sometimes in ornamentals, aphids are an aesthetic problem because nobody wants to see them. The other thing that you get when you have a lot of aphids is you get honeydew and you get sooty mold growing on the honeydew. And sometimes you'll get ants on the honeydew also. So those are all different things that could be caused by aphids in terms of damage. Sometimes it's just their presence and sometimes it's they're actually having a negative effect on plant growth.
I know I didn't prime you for this, but you mentioned it, ants and aphids and how they sort of, quote unquote, farm aphids. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what?
Yeah. They
maybe
absolutely farm aphids, and in fact, they will protect the aphids from biological controls. So they have a very again, insects are amazing. Um, so what the ants are interested in is the sugars. So they don't really need to do anything much to the aphid as long as the aphid's there and producing honeydew. The ants can collect the sugars from the honeydew, but they will protect the aphids from predators or from parasitoids. And we'll talk about both those kinds of biological control later. But you can often find other insects. Was very happily sticking my head in a Christmas tree saying, oh yes, there's wasps here, so there's probably some kind of sicking insect. And I pulled my head out and everyone had backed up because it was a bald-faced hornet, which are nasty. But it didn't sting me because I just, something protects fools. Thank heavens. But so, yes, I mean, it's just the sugars, and that's why they're there, because it's like, free food.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you not be there if there's free food? So, but they do a little work too in terms of protecting the aphids. So they're not. I mean, and as I said with the root aphids, they will move them around, and so that's sometimes another problem if you're trying to control them. That you think they're one place, and you're focusing, because we like to not treat everything. We want to focus whatever we're using for treatment where the problem is, and you find that, oh yeah, somebody's come along and moved them.
Yeah, that is super tricky. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will talk about what farmers can do, what our options are. Be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by Precip. Precip is billed as the easiest way to keep track of rainfall, and that is true, but it is a lot more than that. Sure, you can open the app and immediately see accurate rainfall totals, but you can also save locations to see historical rainfall totals, wind speeds, and all sorts of other nerdy details. Their radar-based technology means you can ditch the rain gauge. I usually have to do that anyway because the kids find a way to smash it with a baseball bat. You can ditch the rain gauge and start tracking rain and other growing conditions all on your phone. Click the link in the show notes to find out more.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so I thought maybe we could discuss sort of organic, non-chemical sort of preventions and management strategies that growers can utilize. So maybe, I don't know, start with prevention?
Well, actually, I'm going to start even before prevention. And so I work in
Perfect.
integrated pest management. So that's the concept is, okay, what tools do we have? Whatever your choice of tools is. So you get to decide whether there's things you want to use or not. But what are all the possible ways you have to manage something? And then how do you put them together? But where we always start is scouting or monitoring and then identification. So if you think you've got aphids and it turns out you've got mites, you're probably not going to do very good management of the pest because you got the wrong thing. So you have to go look. And so how do you go look? Well, you can't look at every plant. You can't look at all parts of the plant necessarily. I mean, we teach a whole greenhouse scout school, actually, teaching people how to scout efficiently so that you can kind of walk into a greenhouse and know where to go check and get a good idea of what's in there. So the first thing then is to be able to scout them. Sometimes you can put out traps. It's hard to do that outside. In a greenhouse, we use that. But there's a reason why aphids aren't very good at turning up on sticky traps. They're not flying around, they're crawling. It's not a good method for aphids. But at any rate, so you're going to scout. You might look for things like honeydew. You might look for things like cast skins, because the aphids are also often on the underside of the leaf above, and they drop their skins below. It's easier to see this stuff on the tops of the leaves. So that's where you're going to start, is scouting, and then making sure that you know what you've got. Even with aphids and biocontrol, you might need to know what kind of aphid you have, because not all biological control organisms work on all aphids. It has to do with size. And they actually come around and tap them to see how big they are before they lay an egg in them. Again, insects are cool. We've definitely determined that I believe that at any rate. So then the next thing is, okay, so what else can you do? So prevention, you can do various things for prevention. When you've got new crop in a field, you might use something like a floating row cover. That's prevention. It's preventing the aphids from getting to the plant. Depending on what you're growing and whether it needs pollinating or various things, you may not be able to leave those on all the time. But as you said, some of the aphids we see more in the spring. So if you can put them on early and then take them off when you need to take them off, you've missed the season, the main season for those aphids. If you're in a greenhouse, you've got screening and other things to keep them from coming in the greenhouse. But they are amazing at getting in. We carry insects on with us. They can come in and plant material. There's a variety of ways to do that. So then there's a few other things that you can do that sort of help in terms of either reducing numbers or preventing the populations from really growing too big. On some tree species, you'll see curling of the leaves, and the aphids are inside those curled leaves. Actually, just pruning out those parts of the plant, because it's usually not the whole plant, going in and pruning those out and taking them away will reduce your populations pretty quickly. Same thing is in a greenhouse. We often see a lot of aphids on one plant, and maybe there's some on the one plant right around it. But if you take that one plant out and deal with the smaller number on the other ones, or else take all of them out if the numbers are high, you can actually really reduce the population in the greenhouse, and you see very little spread. Another thing in greenhouses, it's also true outside, but we don't do as much about it, is if you've got weeds that have that aphids are happy on. We have wild lettuce as a greenhouse weed often. The aphids love it. I will say we've also seen biocontrol going on some of those aphids on the weeds. So there's two pieces in there that might act as a population to keep your biocontrols going. But in general, if you have a lot of weeds with a lot of aphids, it's not going to help you. And then anytime that there's a big population that you can remove easily, that piece of sanitation can help. We talked a little bit already about environment. Can you adjust the environment? So outside this is tough, but inside maybe a little. So the plants are still happy enough, but the aphids are slightly less happy. Not over fertilizing with nitrogen, things like that. You can use water sprays if you have a small number of plants. You can spray them with a fairly strong stream of water. They'll knock them off. Actually, aphids are also cool in that they have alarm pheromones. So sometimes you can just go up to a plant and touch it, and that will make some aphids send off a pheromone that makes all of them fall off the plant. And they've actually even looked at sort of fright as a method of management of aphids. Because if they fall off, they're not dead, but often they can't walk all the way back up to where they were. So same thing, if you knock them off with a water spray, they're not dead, but they usually will not all manage to walk back up. And then one other thing that they use outside sometimes is reflective mulches. So they're actually plastic mulch that's shiny, and it reflects the sky. So they think what it does is disorient aphids coming in, that they're like, well, is that up or is that up? And I don't know. And so it seems to work on reducing aphid populations. And then there's biocontrol, which is my absolute favorite thing. So there's several pieces of biocontrol. One is we'd love to have resistant varieties that actually aphids just don't like. And in this case, it's a species that is a host, but a variety that is not attractive for some reason. We find very few insect resistant varieties, and I couldn't find anything on any aphid resistant varieties. When you start looking for aphid resistance, what you find is there are things that are not hosts. And then there are things that produce an odor that aphids don't like. And so those you could use in a type of biological control, I guess, of companion plantings. And there's several books been written. I can never remember exactly what it is, but it's like Roses Love Carrots or something like that. There's where the one plant, and marigolds is an example where it produces an odor that's pervasive enough in the area that the insect doesn't like anything in that area, even though there's a plant there that they would normally feed on. But my favorite kind is biocontrol, where you've got one organism controlling another one. So for aphids, there is a lot of biocontrol going on out there. And I have in my own garden, a great set of photographs that I took where I was out. I have cup plant, which was just covered. You'll see there's a bunch of kinds of aphids that are often just coating the stem. I mean, just hundreds of aphids. And then there were a lot on the leaves. And so, great, I took a picture of them. Oh, there's aphids here. Less than a week later, I came back. I could find aphid mummies from parasitoid wasps. I could find hoverfly larvae there feeding, and I think I found ladybug larvae there also. And within less than 2 weeks, all the aphids were gone. Almost all the aphids were gone. There were a few mummies. So in many cases, even if you have quite a large population of aphids outside, as long as they're not doing any damage, any physical damage to the plant, just let them go. And especially don't spray anything that's going to kill off your beneficials, because then sometimes you didn't have a big aphid problem. You sprayed something to kill off something else, and now you've got a problem because the beneficials are gone. Most of the things that I'm talking about fly, and that's an advantage, because even if you remove them from one area, they will, if there's something to eat, they'll fly in from outside. So many people are used to talking about lady beetles, lacewings, and those two are probably the most common. And those, if you've got something to eat, they'll find it. And in fact, I was scouting for a newsletter that we have, and was looking at a tree, and I saw a ladybug and thought, well, there's got to be a reason it's there. And sure enough, it had aphids, carpinus with aphids. So they will turn up if there's something to eat. You can purchase them. There's some problems with that, in that some of the ones you might bring in types that have diseases that yours don't have, the wild ones don't have. There's some problems with over collecting wild ones. So generally, I would say just let them appear, the ones that you've got. Lacewings, you can also buy lacewings. That's probably a better option. People like to buy praying mantids, but that often those are not the native ones, and so again, some issues. So if you wanted, for an outside situation, if you wanted to purchase a biological control, I'd go with lacewings. But I think really, in the most part, you don't need to. So lady beetles and lacewings, people are used to. They're probably used to seeing hoverflies too. You may not know what the larvae look like. They look like they look like little maggots, because they are little maggots, and they're orangey. And they're the hoverfly, which we're used to seeing flying around the flowers, lay their eggs right in the aphid colonies, and then that little maggot just walks around eating things. They'll do a really good number on aphids. Minute pirate bugs, which is an Aureus species, are also another one where they're there. You'll see them. They'll eat small aphids anyway. They may not eat the larger ones. So predators are very common outside, and inside I think there are companies now selling hoverfly larvae. You can certainly buy minute pirate bugs, and certainly buy lacewings. The other kind of biological control are the parasitoid wasps. And when I was talking about bald-headed wasps before, those are big. Parasitoid wasps are little. And in fact, even when you want to know if they're there, unless they end up on a sticky card, you won't ever see them. You can release hundreds and thousands and you will never see them because they're small. And their role in life is to go fly around, find an aphid, make sure it's the right size, lay an egg in it, and it's really fast. Sometimes we get them for classes. We'll bring aphids and parasitoid wasps and put them together and let students watch them. And they're amazing. They just go tap it and zing. They'll just lay an egg in it. And then they go off to lay eggs in more aphids. That egg hatches. It doesn't kill the aphid right away because that wouldn't make sense. It needs to keep its food source alive. But it develops within the aphid. And you will see usually sort of a brownish, puffed up looking. It still looks like an aphid, but it doesn't look alive, and it's an aphid mummy. And then when you start seeing little round circles cut in the back end of that mummy, that means another wasp has come out. And they will actually, we found them overwintering in greenhouses here, where, as I said, sometimes we'll see these mummies on the weeds that had aphids on them before we've gone in and released parasitoids that year. So, and outside they're native, so that they will just appear, and they just keep their populations going. In a greenhouse, we sometimes do what's called banker plants, where we'll bring in a kind of aphid which doesn't affect the plants that we're growing. So usually they're aphids that are growing on grasses in terms of ornamentals, and for that matter, vegetable crops. There's not too many that are grasses. So the aphids stay put on the grasses, but the parasitoids can use them as an alternate source to lay eggs in, and then those wasps will hatch out so that you don't have to keep buying them. You're actually producing your own. You have to keep producing the grass plants, and it's not as easy as, oh, I put them out there and everything was fine. But it's a nice way to do it so that you're not, because the one, when you're purchasing them, they certainly cost money and the shipping costs money. But outside, those are all there. You don't have to do a thing. Again, sometimes you might need to do some ant management. We found if you've got some packages of beneficials, like some of the mites, which we're not using for aphids, but the ants will go in there and make the holes bigger, and they'll obviously eat the little mites out of the packages. So there's
Yeah.
And then there's also some fungal diseases. Bavaria bassiana is one that you can see outside. You can see that you'll find some little fuzzy aphids, or they've turned a funny color. They may have a disease. We don't use them a lot in greenhouses. One of the problems with the fungal diseases is they come in from the outside of the insect. And if the insects are shedding skins, or they're casting their skins, they sometimes are growing so fast that they cast the skins before the fungus has had a chance to get all the way inside. So sometimes we need an insect that develops a little more slowly, or an environment that keeps them from developing quite so fast. But there's a lot. So there's lots of aphids out there, and there's lots of possible problems with aphids, but there's also lots of ways to manage them.
And one last quick thing, just in terms of those beneficials, like instead of bringing them in, let's say somebody really wants to build those populations, I'm assuming flowers are your best approach, but is there anything else? Like I've heard, keeping something flowering pretty much year round is the best way to keep beneficials around. Is there anything else sort of missing in that calculus?
So some of it has to do with what kind of flowers. So often plants with small flowers, you'll hear people talk about alyssum a lot. And so it has small flowers, and so they're a food source for the parasitoid wasps. And then but for that matter, even weeds, we're always trying to get rid of weeds, but sometimes weeds have some benefits. And it may be that if you've got an area, again, these things are all flying, so that if you've got an area that's not right in your crop production area, but has even flowering weeds, you will find that, you'll have a population of those parasitoids and of the predators, because there's something to eat over there, and they'll move into your crop. We have a project on looking at beneficial habitat, and we've happened to put it in a Christmas tree field because we wanted to know whether we would see the effect. Well, we haven't had much in the way of pest problems in the Christmas tree field, but this year we finally got balsam twig aphid. Great. Where we got it was right on the rows, right next to the beneficial habitat. But that's partly because of the variety that we have there. It's Fralsum, which is a Fraser balsam cross, and that's what they like. The row that's in the middle also has it. So we'll just have to see if we see more ladybugs in the ones closer to the beneficial habitat than out. But yes, our beneficial habitat is designed so that there's something flowering all the time.
That is very cool. Betsy, this has been amazing. I am just so impressed with aphids, and also ants, and also wasps. They are a little bit too clever for us, maybe. But that's very cool. This has been very fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. This has been fun.
All right. I hope you all enjoyed that episode. Betsy is just the best. We'll link Cornell's integrated pest management program in the show notes, so you can reach out to them if you have questions. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that and get involved in our show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy and awesome way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Kyle Richardville, Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Bill King, and Chris Yates. Shouts to all of them. Our weeklies are just the best. All right, so as our battle begins on the farm, you will remember our retirement sort of assisted living farm. The young apprentices are not at all sure exactly what to do. They called the cops, but had to tone it down a bit, like what was happening, because I don't know. Aliens attacking would probably not get anyone there to help. Anyway, neither side seems to be winning. Not the aliens, not the older farmers. There's a lot of hitting and punching, but very little wounding, and not all of it looks entirely real. Then, out of the blue, they all just start, everybody on both sides stops and starts laughing and cackling. Hugs are doled out. The young farmers stand there just completely dumbfounded and confused as the ogres muck it up with the people who, earlier that morning, were just their mentors and residents of this assisted living facility. Maybe a bit quirky, but not necessarily like fighting aliens quirky. So what is actually happening? Well, that is for tomorrow, provided we get more Patreon members, because we just heard from our weeklies. Anyway, that is tomorrow on the Photon Farmers of Green Pine Road Assisted Living Facility. Yeah, that sounds intimidating, suspenseful. Awesome. All right, see you for Thursday.